there are still lingering doubts about the government's sincerity, or worries whether the government will restart the process in the Legislative Council. So I reiterate here, there is no such plan. The bill is dead.
The bill is dead, but could it be resurrected? That's the problem. And that is a leader under pressure. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, trying very hard to convince everyone that she won't allow the law to be changed to allow people to be extradited to China. Many in Hong Kong just don't trust her. They say they fought too hard over the past couple of months to take any chances.
Scenes of chaos in Hong Kong.
Thousands of angry protesters have stormed the city's parliament,
prompting the legislature to issue its first ever red security alert.
This siege was the most brazen affront to the power of Beijing since Tiananmen Square.
Tensions boiled over during an annual rally to mark the anniversary of Hong Kong's return to China from Britain.
At 4 a.m. local time today here in Hong Kong, the city's chief executive, Carrie Lam, she called a snap press conference.
These violent acts that we have seen, it is right for us to condemn it.
Hong Kong has seen massive protests for months over a controversial extradition bill.
The bill would allow for the first time the transfer of people deemed criminals to the Chinese mainland.
They are really afraid of the Chinese judicial system. It's very opaque, it's very unpredictable.
The activists continue to press for Carrie Lam to resign and for her to shelve a controversial extradition bill once and for all.
Protesters fear she is allowing Beijing to erode their freedom.
She has lost credibility with Hong Kong people, particularly with the young people.
But the government never listens.
The government just simply doesn't care.
Because the government leaves us no choice. We have nothing to do but to fight.
What happens next? Carrie Lam has apologized. Will she have to go?
That's what they want. They have a number of demands, including the complete withdrawal of this controversial extradition bill.
A major win for protesters in Hong Kong. The city's chief executive says that controversial extradition bill is now dead.
There are still lingering doubts about the government's sincerity. So I reiterate here, the bill is dead.
Yes, there are certainly some lingering doubts about whether or not the bill is dead, and that includes from one of our panel here, Joshua Wong, a student activist. He was quite famous during the Umbrella movement in 2014. And we also have Nixie Lam on the right there. Both of them are in Hong Kong. She takes the opposite view. She's a local politician. She says that protesters should trust the Chinese government and blames fake news for fanning the protests. And finally, in the bottom left there, we have Rahim Mahmood, a veteran of the Tiananmen Square protests 30 years ago, who's got some advice for Joshua and his friends. Joshua, we'll start with you. It seems that you've won, haven't you? She says categorically, the bill is dead.
The bill is dead is kind of misleading narrative from Carrie Lam. In fact, when we check on the legislative program, the bill still exists and not being terminated yet. That's why people still continue urge government to withdraw the bill, because people are fully worried and aware that Hong Kong government might reactivate the legislative process of this extradition bill again in the next 12 months. And that's the threats that haven't been solved yet.
Nixie, do you think the protesters can trust Carrie Lam when she says that the controversial bill is dead?
I think absolutely. I don't see a chance that she can pull that out again in another 12 months. I mean, she's been defeated in multiple angles by a lot of people during this time, and I think it's a good chance for her to reconsider whether her focus should be shifted down to a more down-to-earth approach of what's happening to the people's life rather than this extradition bill.
And do you think she did the right thing by backing down, or should she have kept trying to push it through?
I don't think she can push it through in this sort of climate. It's good that she come out and clarify that the bill is dead. I think what is more important is that we need to focus on the aftermath, on how we're going to fix all those issues on trust. So I'm actually in the government building right now. Next door, we're having a meeting with the Youth Commission discussing on how we can revamp the commission and try to have a better communication in the future, whether we're going to restructure and this and that.
Oh, we'll come to that later. Joshua, let's just rewind for a moment, just for the benefit of our international viewers. Why do you fear the possibility of Hong Kongers being extradited to China?
According to the extradition bill introduced by Hong Kong government, it could allow Hong Kong government extradite any Hong Kong ordinary citizen or foreign visitors or resident in Hong Kong from Hong Kong, my hometown, to mainland China, the place without fair trial and judicial independence. And with this threat, 2 out of 7 million of population already took to the street, urged government to withdraw the bill.
Carrie Lam, you can understand why they would be worried, can't you? I know you are close to Beijing on this issue, but surely you can understand their fears.
We need to focus on the details of that. Well, that is one of the worry that they're worried. But then if you look into the bill itself, it says that everything has to go through the High Court of Hong Kong, where all the judges is actually retired judges from the UK, from Canada, from Australia. They were chief judges that has a very professional experience on the situation. And then that is one of the huge gate that it can stop any unfairness that will happen. So a fair judge will happen.
That doesn't convince Joshua. Come in, Joshua.
I guess Carrie Lam provides the misleading information, because even the extradite process might go through district court. It's not in High Court or Supreme Court or the Court of Final Appeal of Hong Kong that have more senior judges from British, from Canada or other country with criminal system. So just take back to the extradition bill detail. We're fully aware on how it violates on rule of law and judicial independence. And I realized that the political parties that Carrie Lam belongs to were the strong supporters of this bill a few months ago. But later on, even past few weeks, the chairman of DAB, which is the largest pro-Beijing party,
actually agrees
and in DAB already show a strong support and to withdraw the bill.
Carrie Lam's, the chairman of the DAB actually agrees that it would be the best choice to suspend, because we see the situation in Hong Kong. If we're going to pursue going on to that, the policeman's going to get hurt, the student's going to get hurt, and the whole ambience was happening in Hong Kong is not healthy.
I think
it's a right and responsible choice. If you see it's not okay, we need to stop it.
I'd like to bring Rahim in for a moment. Rahim, you left China, you came to the United Kingdom in order to pick up for human rights back in China. You tell us about your experiences and why you believe the protesters have every right to be worried.
Well, yes, I came to the UK in 2000 after witnessing 1997 Rulja massacre, which is the city, my home city in East Turkestan. The Chinese call it Xinjiang. And I also participated 89 student movement in Tiananmen Square, and I left on the 2nd of June. And from my own experience, that in China, the people don't really have any right for assembly or protest. And at the moment, the law is becoming tough. And as people know, in Xinjiang at the moment, in East Turkestan, millions of Uyghurs being incarcerated in so-called re-education camps. And this is a very worrying situation. The Chinese people are very scared the same kind of situation will happen in other provinces. And China has this very infamous, the Chinese government have this very infamous crackdown on any kind of dissidents, any different voices. So I think the people in Hong Kong have every right or every possibility to worry about what is going to happen to them.
Thank you, Rahim. You know, it's interesting, of course, this has been the arrangement between China and Hong Kong for years. So why did Carrie Lam try to introduce this incredibly controversial law now? Well, it was prompted by a murder on Valentine's Day. It was back in February 2018 that a Hong Konger, Chan Tong Kai, murdered his girlfriend in Taiwan before jetting back home. And he couldn't be sent back to Taiwan to face trial because there's no formal extradition treaty between the two. But exactly a year later, Carrie Lam said it was time for a new law to allow suspects in Hong Kong to be extradited to Taiwan and mainland China.
因為頭先講咗啦，我哋嗰個工作嘅初心咧，我仍然係堅實認為係啱嘅。不但止對受害人嘅家屬有所交代，我而家只能夠講有得交代，我唔能夠應承潘生潘太，我一定可以讓到謀害佢哋嘅女兒嘅嫌疑犯咧可以被繩之於法。
So she says it was about solving crime and so on. Joshua Wong, Joshua, you think it's more about political opportunism, right?
Political agenda has been set by Carrie Lam. In fact, no one strongly criticized on having the idea to set up extradition procedure between Hong Kong and Taiwan, the place with rule of law and judicial independence. But everyone in Hong Kong just asking the question, when the Hong Kongers murder his girlfriend in Taiwan and take the flight back to Hong Kong, is just related to the extradition arrangement or agreement between Hong Kong and Taiwan. How come at the same time Hong Kong government has the idea also set up the extradition agreement between Hong Kong and mainland China, the place without fair trial? And one point I would like to add is when this bill had been introduced on February, pro-democratic camp strongly opposed and urged government to withdraw the bill. In fact, on last month, after massive rally happened, not only pro-democratic camp, but also pro-Beijing camp also suggested government accept the request to withdraw the extradition bill. But until this moment, Hong Kong government still have not withdrawn the bill yet. It shows how Carrie Lam is just selected by Beijing, but not listen to the voice of people.
Nick, see, that's the point, isn't it? That people think that Carrie Lam is basically appointed by Beijing, and therefore anything she does, including this, it's not about law enforcement, it's about giving China the reach to get into Hong Kong.
I don't think so. I strongly oppose that idea. I think one of the biggest failure for Carrie Lam is she's done a very, very poor PR job. She needs to understand Hong Kong people are very open to ideas and everything. You need to have a better approach to talk to Hong Kong people. You cannot just say, okay, this is what the government procedures, I will follow all the procedures, and then my job will be done. She was an administrative officer before, but now, if once she becomes an accountable, like the chief executive, she needs to solve the problems and doubts that happens to any sort of bill or any sort of ideas or any sort of developments. That is the key failure that she's actually facing right now. I don't think that's anything wrong with the bill itself, but the problem is she's done a very, very poor job on PR.
You say it's just about PR, but, you know, we spoke to some young people in Hong Kong via Skype, and it's, for them, a very personal story, not just a geopolitical story, and they are afraid. Let's have a listen to what they had to say.
Many young people are getting involved in these protests because they fear for their future.
One of the things that young people struggle with is a huge generation gap between us and, I guess, the people from our parents or grandparents' age, where they feel like, oh, things are okay now, why are you causing such a fuss?
China will take control of Hong Kong even more. So if we can't protect Hong Kong right now, then how about the future?
We're scared that we might become totally like China.
We enjoy a much larger degree of freedom. And in Hong Kong, we have the freedom of speech and we have the freedom of press, etc. Moreover, it's very important that we have a different culture to China.
We've been getting news about news updates about human rights lawyers in China who are still being imprisoned or have not seen their families in the last 4 years since they were arrested. And in itself is already a clear example of why people are afraid.
I feel like we are the only people that dare to fight against the Chinese government.
We are fighting very hard for our democracy, and we really want to be a part of the free world.
I hope Hong Kong can be as free from the Chinese influence as possible and enjoy, the maximum amount of freedom and autonomy and rights that we should have.
That's just an idea there of the strength of feeling in Hong Kong. And if you look at the incredible pictures that have come out since Carrie Lam introduced the amendment on April the 3rd, they really are stunning. Let's have a look at just about a month later, this punch-up with lawmakers involved. Then less than a month later, we had those enormous protests, 1 million protesters on the streets, although the Hong Kong police said it was probably more like 250,000. A couple of days later, on June the 12th, rubber bullets were fired as protesters prevented the second reading of the bill. Then June the 16th, a couple of days after that, the biggest protest of them all, 2 million people on the streets. That is something like a third of the entire Hong Kong population. I mean, if that was the United States, it would have to be close to 100 million people on the streets. And of course, that same day, Carrie Lam issued a written apology. And 2 days later, on June the 18th, an actual apology on camera.
This has led to controversies, disputes, and anxieties in society. For this, I offer my most sincere apology to all people of Hong Kong.
That wasn't enough. On July the 1st, on the 22nd anniversary of the handover, there was the storming of LegCo, the Legislative Council. And then just 7 days later, she came out and said, in case there's any ambiguity, the bill is dead.
The bill is dead.
Let's go back to Nixie Lam for a moment. Nixie, I know you're not terribly sympathetic to people who'd want to prevent the bill going through, but you have to admit, you haven't seen scenes like this in Hong Kong, have you?
No. It's a very big impact this time, and it actually make everyone in Hong Kong think on what we need to do in the future, on our approach and everything else. We need to be very careful. It's always about feeling. As I talk about, like when you talk about what happens before and everything, it's always a very big issue on trust. Hong Kong people doesn't trust the government. It doesn't trust the Chinese government. So the government needs to do something to make people trust if they're going to pursue with anything else. So we see a lot of situations that is any single issue the government tries to put through, even though it's not a political agenda, people doesn't trust you. So before you can do a better PR job on that, I don't think anything good for the development of Hong Kong will happen.
Okay, back to Rahima for a second. Rahima, Nixie, for the second time at least, has talked about a better PR job. But you think it's a more fundamental situation than that, right?
It's a more fundamental situation because the Hong Kong people can see what is happening in China. That is what they make them horrified. Because if the pro-Chinese governors are making these decisions, not listening to the will of the Hong Kong people, and they fear that the situation can become worse. You can push through one law and maybe it will follow next. So obviously the people in Hong Kong wouldn't want that happen.
And Rahima, as somebody who was in the Tiananmen Square protests, are these pictures that you're seeing coming in from Hong Kong to you, where you now live in Britain, these must be quite inspiring for you.
It is. It brings back, a lot of memories, but also fear, because when we were protesting at that time, before the June 4th, before I left, we had the hope that China can change to a democratic system. That was all the students wanted. But after the crackdown, the June 4th, when I returned home in July, passing Beijing, Beijing was completely different city, a ghost city. So we don't want to see that in Hong Kong as well.
Joshua, you're responsible for coordinating some of those people onto the streets. Are you proud of what you're doing? And are you surprised by the level of support in Hong Kong society?
2 out of 7 million people took to the street broke the Hong Kong's history. It's not only related to a kind of PR crisis, it related to the leader of Hong Kong, the chief executive, never get any mandate from Hong Kong people because the chief executive is selected by Beijing instead of elected by Hong Kong people. That's the reason for us to fight for free election and democracy. And Hong Kong people deserve democracy instead of suffering under the erosion of one country, two system to one country, 1.5 system.
You know, from Beijing's point of view, one of the most outrageous incidents, the storming of the Legislative Council on the 22nd anniversary of Britain's handover to Hong Kong to China, really stuck in their craw. Protesters use the occasion every year to complain that China isn't respecting the handover agreement. But of course, a lot has changed since the old colonial power agreed to cede control to Beijing. When the Sino-British Declaration was signed in 1984, the world was a very different place. It was the year Apple released its first ever Macintosh. The perm was the most fashionable hairdo. And Britain's economy was 1.5 times bigger than China. Hard to believe, but true. And so, in that relatively strong position, it was able to insist that Hong Kong would continue to enjoy a high degree of autonomy, with laws remaining basically unchanged for the next 50 years. And when the handover took place 13 years later, Britain remained economically and militarily strong. A military match for China, in Hollywood's eyes at least, which imagined them both on the brink of war until James Bond saved the day.
Don't get any ideas. I'd never dream of it.
But things have moved on. China's grown bigger, stronger, richer, and moved up the ranks. Now Beijing controls the second biggest economy in the world and spends more on its military than any other country except the United States. And China has its hands on Britain's crown jewels. Nope, not those. These key industries, including energy and telecoms. And so, as China's grown stronger, it's grown more dismissive of the handover agreement, describing it simply as a piece of history with no practical significance during the last big protest in 2017. So, what can Britain really do if China doesn't want to play by the rules? Not much, it seems. Even Britain's vague threats of serious consequences were quickly batted away by the Chinese ambassador to London.
I'm calling the British government to reflect the consequences of its words and deeds.
As far as China's concerned, the Sino-British Joint Declaration is yesterday's news. Back to Nixie Lam in Hong Kong for a moment. Nixie, is that right? According to Beijing, that's just an old document. They don't need to worry about it anymore.
I don't think so. We are still under one country, two system. I think one of the things that we're always focusing on what happens on June 4th and what happens to the old China. But then we also need to look at the developments in China right now. I'm not only talking about the economy development. If you look at the jurisdiction system right now, they are doing live judging court judgings online, live streaming. I mean, Chinese people has their expectation for the government as well. Under this technology impact, the requirement from the people are ever stronger than before. So the government already started to change as well. And we need to be more open and look at the development on that side. I mean, it wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't be up to our standard at this moment, but then they are changing.
Joshua, in your position, do you ever look over at the old colonial power and wish that they would do more? Or do you recognise that there's really little they can do?
Crackdown on human rights is more serious under the leadership of President Xi Jinping compared to the era of Wu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. I hope to point out that political and economic freedom in Hong Kong is strongly eroded by Beijing, no matter on interference of the communist regime or just how targeted or silence the voice of businessmen and dissidents, we all suffer in kind of threat. And it's the time for international communities, if they recognize the unique status of Hong Kong as the global financial center, it's important for them to guarantee the political and economic status of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is different with mainland China.
Rahim, a final thought from you. You came to the United Kingdom to raise the issue of human rights in China. Do you wish that the UK government did more for what is going on in Hong Kong, or do you recognise that it actually has very limited powers these days?
I do wish that the UK government could do more to help the people in Hong Kong, and also push the Chinese government to honor the agreements which was signed during the handover. But I do feel that they are powerless.
Rahim and Mahmood, thank you very much. Joshua Wong and Carrie Lam, both of you in Hong Kong, of course, for joining us late in the evening there. And thank you for watching too. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. For now, though, goodbye. See you next week.